Hello people, it's me Charles Martel with a new video this week. Now, sorry for not uploading content for a long time since I've been busy researching because the history and development of Sunni Islam is much more complex and I have to read a lot. Even though I just make a brief summary, I want to give you guys all the information I can. But this week's I've just been reading and updating my information. However, this week I want to upload a video on a very controversial topic. And I know the comment section hopefully does not explode with rage. But it's the issue of Islamophobia. So I want to tackle the issue not by defending the position which says that Islamophobia exists and is a real thing. On the other hand, I don't want to defend the position which says that Islamophobia doesn't exist either. I will of course deal with both positions in this video, but I will not support any of them for reasons I will explain in a minute. Now, as I always like to do, let's go first to the etymology of the word Islamophobia. So basically, this word has two components, one of which is Islam, which of course I think everyone knows what it is, and the other one is phobia. Now, this one is particularly interesting in itself because the word phobia comes from the Greek phobos. Now, phobos in Greek means irrational fear of something. Now, there are many types of phobias. Actually, this is a clinical disorder. There's people who have arachnophobia, phobia to spiders, ophidophobia, phobia to snakes, and people have phobia to heights. I don't remember the exact terminology for all of them. There are even phobias regarding clowns and rats. I mean, there is a whole host of phobias. Basically, the whole point of it being an irrational fear, it's not because being scared of something is irrational, at least most of the time. I mean, people who have ophidophobia or snake phobia, for example, I mean, there are venomous snakes and even non-venomous snakes like anacondas can be extremely dangerous for humans or for other animals, and actually our brain evolved to fear snakes. The same thing with spiders and of course heights, because if you're in a 12-story building and you look down, of course you're going to be scared of falling down. So the irrational part basically comes with the magnification of fear. What this means is that the fear becomes irrational when basically you stop fearing, say, a live cobra standing next or being next to you, when you basically translate that fear in that you can't watch movies about snakes, or you can't even watch pictures of snakes, and that is when the phobia becomes irrational, because there is no reason to be scared of a photograph of a snake or of a movie of a snake, because the snakes are not going to jump out of the screen and kill you. So that is when the fear becomes irrational. There is people who, for example, people with phobia to heights, and when they go in a 3-story building up, then they start having panic attacks. Even if you fall from 3 stories high, you won't likely die. You break some bones, but you won't likely die. So this is what it's called irrational fear. Now, can there be an irrational fear of Islam? The answer is yes and no. So it's more complex. Why? Okay, let's not talk for a minute about the phobia of the irrational fear, and let's focus on Islam itself. So as you should know, at least those who watch my videos should know, Islam is not one thing. Islam is not a monolith. Islam is a myriad of different interpretations, religious ideas, political thoughts, cultures. I mean, Islam is extremely diverse. So basically, when people fear Islam, the question is which part of Islam, or what Islam, or which sect of Islam do they fear? However, with Islamophobia, what happens is that they fear anything associated with Islam. And that could mean, say, a mosque, a guy with a turban, someone with a Middle Eastern sounding name, even people who are from non-Muslim countries that seem foreign. For example, people from the country of Georgia, which have very weird names, or people from India who look brown and who look Muslim. This is a big problem actually, because anti-Muslim attacks have also been aimed at non-Muslims. There have been attacks against Lebanese Christians, even Sikhs, people who are not Muslim but who are associated with Islam. Now, basically, Islamophobia is very related to another concept that I think a lot of you might have heard of in the past, which is xenophobia, which also has Greek roots. We already explained what a phobia is, but xeno or xenos in Greek actually means foreigner. So a xenophobia is a foreigner from the outsider, from the one who comes from somewhere else, from someone who is outside of the community. Now, we use it to say fear and discrimination against people who come from other countries, but really the etymology is just fear from anyone who's outside the in-group. And basically, in this case, the in-group would be the West, and the out-group would be the East, the Muslims, the foreigners, the Orient. So there is a big link between the irrational fear of anything sounding Islamic and basically the irrational fear of anything that is non-Western. By the way, there can also be xenophobia against non-Muslims. I mean, there is a specific xenophobia against Asians, against Chinese, Japanese people. In the US, against Latino, Hispanics. I mean, there can be xenophobia of any type, really. So basically, the irrational fear of anything that resembles Islam is tied to anything that resembles foreigners. And I think this is something that a lot of people have already observed in the behavior of Islamophobia. However, basically, those who dislike Islam, let's not call them Islamophobes, those who dislike Islam, or those who criticize Islam, or even those who fear Islam, basically don't simply fear Islam because it comes from somewhere else. Of course, there is a lot of people who dislike Muslims simply because they are the other. But among the Islamophobes, you find people who give specific complaints as to why they fear or dislike Islam. Now, of course, the most obvious one, which is basically the one that really started propagating this whole thing, is terrorism. And I think this requires no explanation, because basically terrorism feeds on fear. it's in the name, terror. But probably there are some other more nuanced aspects that people criticize of Islam and are often accused of being Islamophobic. Probably another one a lot of people might have heard of is Sharia. Now, I won't go into details on what Sharia is, that requires a video of its own, and actually I think I will explain a little bit about it in the video about Sunni Islam. But Sharia, as it's traditionally understood, it's understood as Islamic law. Now, as we've seen, we've discussed, Islam is very diverse. So basically, Islamic law is not a unified thing. Technically, it has several bases, one of which is the Quran, which actually, if you take a look at the text itself, it actually has very few actual laws, specific laws, especially those dictating what you eat, divorce, and in some instances criminal punishment. For example, chopping off the hands of thieves. It's an example from the Quran. But most of Sharia is derived from Hadith. I think I explained this in the video of Sunnism, but just to recap, the hadiths, or hadith in Arabic, are essentially narrations attributed to Muhammad when he was alive. And basically, his word is considered, at least by the majority of Muslims, to be legally binding. But there is also a significant portion of the Sharia which is actually interpretations from the Quran and the Hadith, which were done throughout centuries by Islamic scholars. Now, I won't go here into details, but basically the laws differ across Islamic sects and schools of thought, and they differ significantly. So basically, when people say they fear Sharia, what they are specifically referring to is they fear the criminal code of Sharia, because Sharia covers a whole host of aspects, from what you eat, even stupid things, to how you go to the bathroom, to criminal punishment. And I think people are afraid of Sharia because they fear criminal punishment, which is considerably understandable given the fact that there are laws which says that apostates should be killed, homosexuals should be thrown out of buildings, and the hands of thieves should be cut off, and adulterers should be stoned or whipped. So there is a whole host of laws which are quite extreme. However, and this is a big however, even the most extremist among the Muslims will tell you, and if they don't, they are contradicting Sharia principles. And this is actually found across all the different sects. As far as I've seen, Sharia is only applicable to Muslims. Why? Well, because if you go back to the time of Muhammad and to the time of the actual caliphates, the legal systems of Jews and Christians and other minorities were separated from those of the Muslims. Actually, there are provisions in Sharia which state that the cases involving Jews and Christians should be referred back to their specific courts and not judged by Sharia, as basically even their testimony is considered invalid. So when the Westerners say that Muslims are trying to implement Sharia in the West, probably they are trying to implement Sharia, but that would only apply to the Muslims. Of course, it doesn't make it okay either, and basically those who should be more worried are the Muslims themselves. But the Westerners themselves, even living under Sharia, are not or cannot be judged by Sharia, and that's actually a principle that even the most extremist among the Islamic jurists can tell you. So again, it is irrational because by absolutely no means on this earth, unless you are forced at gunpoint to convert to Islam, which is extremely rare and has been extremely rare throughout history, you will never be compelled to adopt Sharia. But it is also rational considering that Sharia is, well, a hellhole in itself. And I think the ones who should be most scared of Sharia are Muslims. Now, we've discussed different aspects of Islamophobia, among them the fear of terrorism and the fear of Sharia, some of which are legitimate, like terrorism, although if you are honest, terrorism is not exclusively Islamic. We've had far-right, far-left terrorism, nationalist terrorism, Christian terrorism. Terrorism is a tactic. It's not an ideology. But fear of terrorism is completely legitimate. And fear of extremist Islamic extremists who blow themselves up is also legitimate. Fear of Sharia is somewhat legitimate, as I already explained, but there is also the other part of Islamophobia, and that is good old-fashioned racism. Yes, Islamophobia involves an aspect of racism, as we already discussed. Islamophobia is tied to xenophobia, or fear of the other. Now, a lot of Muslims claim that Islamophobia is pure and simple racism, which in part it is, because a lot of the people who dislike Muslims are people who simply dislike Muslims not because Sharia is bad, but because they are not white people, period. And because they have weird foreign customs, period. So basically one could break down Sharia into two aspects. And this is where the debate really comes in. So there is uh, basically xenophobia slash racism, and then you have criticism of Islam. Now one of these is legitimate, the other is not. Racism and xenophobia are not legitimate and in many countries is punishable by prison. Now what Islamophobic acts constitute this action? For example, hate crimes, discrimination, or religious or denial of religious freedom. Now hate crimes, obvious. You go and shoot at a mosque, or you see a woman with the hijab walking in the street and you ripped off the hijab from her head, or you beat the crap out of someone because he looks Muslim. Discrimination is I don't rent you a house because you're Muslim. And denial of freedom of religion is, for example, in France, the Muslims are not allowed to carry open religious symbolism. And also in many cities, they are not allowed to wear veils in public spaces. They are not allowed to pray in public spaces. They are not allowed to eat the religiously sanctioned halal meat. This is religious discrimination. So this is denial of religious freedom, which, by the way, at least in the US, is protected by the Constitution. Now, what constitutes criticism of Islam, I think it's pretty obvious, is when you attack the Quran, when you attack the figure of Muhammad. This can even go up to the point of insulting or mocking the Quran, even burning it. Also Muhammad, also, God or whatever Islamic tenets you might find. I mean, if you insult or if you mock or if you criticize any of the beliefs, it is beliefs of Muslims. This is a little ugly. If you attack the beliefs of Muslims, this is legitimate criticism of Islam. Now, why do a lot of people, both Muslim and non-Muslim, see a link between the two? In the case of Muslims, they associate criticism of Islam with racism or with personal attacks because of a post-colonial mentality, which basically says, if you criticize my culture or my religion in any way, it's because you are criticizing it from the white colonialistic perspective, and you're basically just trying to show me that your culture is superior to mine. That's a fair argument. However, a lot of Muslims and ex-Muslims coming from those cultures criticize Islam, and in some instances they don't even do it from a Western perspective. And there are actually a lot of non-Western societies which are also highly critical of Islam. Now, of course, in a lot of early critics of the religion, there was, of course, the idea of the West is superior to Islam, which is actually false. I mean, both have good and bad things. And in the case of the racist and xenophobic people, they criticize Islam to covertly attack Muslims, and they do it with intent of provoking Muslims and also to stoking anti-Muslim hatred. This is true. So you take a far right, where basically they start talking and criticizing Quran and Muhammad, but they end up basically in a rhetoric: Muslims are here to wipe us out from the face of the earth. There is really a fine line between hate speech and legitimate criticism. Now, how do you prevent this line from being crossed? And I think this is a question a lot of you might be asking. I don't have an absolute answer because I don't know everything. If I would, it would be cool, but I don't. What I think is best to do to prevent, crossing the fine line between, uh, you know, hate speech, racism, and legitimate criticism of an ideology is basically do it in the grounds of respect. What does this mean? This means that even though you don't agree with a particular position, say from a Muslim, you criticize that position, but you respect the right of that person to have that belief. It is very hard, especially given our polarized climate today in the world, but, well, it has to be done. And not only with Islamophobia, it has to be done with anything. I mean, respect and acknowledging the other's opinion as legitimate is key to having a civil society. French philosopher Voltaire in the 18th century said, "I may not agree with your ideas, but I am willing to die defending your right to express them." And also, it should be encouraged a more pluralistic debate. What do I mean by a pluralistic debate? What I mean is basically to include the different views and interpretations within Islam, as well as the different views and interpretations of the people who dislike Islam. Now, this includes ex-Muslims, actual racists, uh, atheists, and people from other religions, or general people who might have concerns around Islam. And I think both Muslims and non-Muslims, first of all, need to acknowledge that there is not one true Islam. This is probably the worst thing someone can say. There is not one true Islam. There are many different interpretations of Islam. Many. And they should be acknowledged as valid. And basically, people should judge by themselves, both Muslim and non-Muslim, which interpretation do they find better. I think probably one of the things that might help to solve the Islamophobia problem, if you want to call it like that, is to acknowledge the diversity within Islam. This is a thing that has to be done by both Muslims and non-Muslims alike. So, to recap, Islamophobia has two main components, one of which is anti-Muslim racism, if you can call it like that, which is bad and, by the way, illegal. And on the other hand, you have legitimate criticism of Islam, and basically, sadly, the two of them intersect, like legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism intersect. But they are two different things, and the only way I think we should separate the two is to first of all acknowledge the diversity within Islam, and second, we need to have a more civilized debate in which all positions are included and where basically there is mutual respect, which sounds impossible. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be uploading new videos sooner, hopefully.